Why did Nike choose this as their logo font? And what does the Aston Martin logotype say about its brand? How do these font choices communicate and possibly trick consumers? What is the OG font used on the Nike logo? 3 points to you if you know the exact font choice for this logo design. So the design uses Futura, and to be more specific, Futura Condensed Extra Black. If you want to truly level up in logo design, or just as a graphic designer in general, you need to start understanding why certain fonts are used and then translate that knowledge into your workflow. But going back to that question, why have Nike chosen Futura Condensed as their brand asset? Well, let's ask this question. What does Nike want to communicate as a brand to their audience? It's a sports brand, so sending out a message of strength, stability, power, a kind of modern cutting-edge vibe, and maybe a sense of motion would be a great start. The logo symbol itself, the swoosh, does half of the work in communicating the message to the audience. The style of the typeface does the other half. Futura Condensed Extra Black is very bold and very hard-hitting. It looks robust, it looks strong, and it looks somewhat modern even to this day. The modern look is in part due to it being a sans serif font, and when it's used in italics, we get that kind of sense of forward motion that works really well for sports type brands. This font wasn't drawn out of a hat or chosen because the designer simply liked it. It was a well thought out decision that works even to this day. Let's try the next logo font, and that's for Aston Martin. First, we should consider what this brand sells, which of course is fairly expensive cars. Who do they sell these fairly expensive cars to? Well, professionals, business owners, millionaires, and so on. With all of that in mind, what does Aston Martin want to convey to their target audience? Well, they probably want to show they are superior, have a sophisticated sense of class, and are somewhat serious in nature. If we look deeper into Aston Martin's brand message from their own website, they suggest that the winged logo is meant to represent elegance, freedom, refinement, and elite performance. So with that in mind, would a lowercase sans serif font choice such as Avant-Garde Gothic work for this logo? Well, probably not, because it's too bold, it's too personal, and it's too informal. Instead, they utilize Optima Roman. This choice of typeface works really well because it looks professional and formal. However, it also looks elegant and light because it's not so bold and it's not so loud in nature. It's really quite refined. But let's take a look at a third example. Let's run the sequence through once more. Think to yourself, what is this brand selling? Who are they selling it to? And what sort of emotions or feelings do they want to communicate to their target audience? If you continually think like this, guys, you will go a lot further in your design careers than most other people out there. So Armani is situated in the middle of a very prestigious and very stylish niche sector, that being the world of fashion. It's positioned at the somewhat high end of the spectrum, relatively speaking, so you can probably come up with words such as luxury, elegance, style, and prestige. Taking a look at psychology of typefaces, serif fonts tend to fall right in line with these kind of words. So you can see how it's simply just a case of knowing exactly what you want to say to an audience, and of course finding out who the audience is, and then tailoring the style of the typeface to the audience. It's such a simple concept, and yet it is so easy to mess up without the right knowledge and execution. The first type of logo we're going to talk about today is the lettermark, or as some might say, the monogram logo. These logos are comprised of just text, but they do use the initials of a company or brand. The main reason for this kind of logo is where a brand name is too long to be, well, brandable, and so the name is abbreviated into single letters. For example, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or as we commonly know, NASA. Now, if you have a client who has an extra long brand name, and as a designer you think it's not going to work as a logo, then you might try suggesting a monogram logo. But they are often tricky to work with because you need to find a way to make a handful of letters become iconic and to stand out from the crowd. However, it can be done, of course. Next up, another strictly typographic logo, the wordmark. Some examples that exist are Disney, Google, Coca-Cola and FedEx. But when would you possibly consider this kind of logo variation for your clients? Now, a wordmark is often good for startups or new businesses, and this is because it literally gets their name out there in the open world. They are simple and communicate to the target audience easily because the logo is exactly what it says. However, you need to use your knowledge of design and marketing to convey the right message and the tone with the typography. Disney has a very elaborate and decorative font because it's based around a sense of fantasy and magical entertainment for children. Also, it's quite important to keep the wordmark logo short, nothing too long in terms of the number of characters you use. Wordmarks are also good for showing a brand's confidence. You'll notice a lot of fashion brands have wordmark logos, or at least they heavily use the wordmark versions. But how about the brand mark, or as others might say, the pictorial mark logo? These are often added into a logo design package, but there are some brands that exclusively just use a brand mark for their logo. The advantage of doing this is they're simple and easy to recognize globally. That's because there are no specific languages used, so basically they're just universal. The tricky part is actually designing a brand mark that is solely related to the brand itself. Very few brands venture down this route in the modern era. Brands like Twitter and Target are brands that most of the time only use their brand mark when it comes to representing themselves in society. They do have versions of their logo that is complementary with logotype, but they rarely use them. When done correctly, the brand mark logo is great for forming that psychological bond between brand and target audience. And also when it is done correctly, the bond runs pretty deep. Now, the combination logo mark uses both a logotype and a brand mark. These are the most commonly seen types of logo out there, and in my honest opinion, they're likely the easiest to work with as a designer. These are good for clients who don't have lengthy brand names, and also when you want to offer flexibility. Like I said earlier, these days a lot of designers, including myself, will package a logo in the forms of just the brand mark, just the typography, and then also a version of them both together as a combination mark. You want to make sure that your typeface style matches the style of the message or the brand mark, and that's so the overall design comes together and also conveys the intended message. If your client is looking for intense simplicity, then you might want to just focus on the brand mark or word mark. Emblem logos are quite niche. The most notorious, of course, is the Starbucks logo. By appearance, they seem very traditional and some might even say outdated. However, these types of logos do suggest authority, authenticity, and demand respect. They're often used for organizations or government entities, and also any kind of group or team as well. This is mainly due to the roundness of the design, which psychologically speaking suggests togetherness. Mascot logos are again quite niche. They come across as sort of entertaining and fun. They are there to give the brand a face or character to remember and possibly even to appeal to. A lot of restaurants and food type brands do use mascots for the logo designs. That's because they are fun and also that their clients should feel the same way when engaging with the brands. That being said, using a mascot as a logo can easily go wrong, and it's hard to pinpoint the right type of mascot for a brand that can stand the test of time. It is possible, but it's also not easy. Grids are insanely helpful in logo designing, but they're often misunderstood. We will for sure get to the circular magic and the beautiful lines, but firstly, just remember this one crucial thing. Logo design grids, for the most part, are used in the later stages of a logo design project. You first need to go through the design process of research, developing concepts, and all that good stuff. The logo grid itself is used to neaten up and perfect the logo in the latter stages. Now that's out of the way and said and done, let's get to the juicy stuff. The first thing you should know about logo grids is that, as a general rule, circular and oval grids are awesome for making organic and natural kinds of logos. You know, like this chilled polar bear logo design right here, or this kangaroo. If this kangaroo is an actual brandable logo is another matter, but as a general rule, if you want something natural, then a lot of circular grids will help that fact. On the flip side, you then have the more man-made and rigid designs. These logos heavily use straight lines for the grids. And I find on my logo designs, depending on the shape psychology of course, 45-degree lines do work really well for neat designs like this. More about that later. So this first point is just a general rule and it's not a set in stone kind of thing. But let's look at the next aspect of logo design grids that I think you agree does make a lot of sense. Now, a lot of reasoning behind the use of grids is to keep your logo designs precise. Let's take a look at this Vespula design a little bit closer. The micro white space within the symbol is the same width throughout the entire design, and that's because I used a grid. However, we can call this space 1x or just 1 times. If I ever want to increase a part of the design that has a width of 2x or 2 times, I can use a grid to 100% precisely do that. It's one obvious but truly powerful reason for using a grid on your logos. Using grids with a set spacing that is precise and shown on a grid is also a great way to send clients a logo version so they can see how well mapped out it is, but it also helps any future designers who will end up working on this design. And speaking of width, let's take the Coco Chanel logo to demonstrate the next tip for using grids on your logos. Because here at Satori Graphics, we look at the how to do something, but also the why. Anyway, when using grids on your logos, you can use circles to measure or show a width of the part of a design, but then show how that width is maintained in different areas of the design. This keeps things precise and clean, and it's one of those techniques that shows professionalism. Here's a mock logo to show you the next use for logo design grids, and this one again demonstrates a precise nature. You want to aim for precision when you're finishing your logos. So let's add some lines to represent a grid, and we will look at actual grids later in the video, guys. But let's take our design and we can measure the angle degrees from the logo to the logo grid line, and that's 72 degrees. However, being precise and using grids to design things, we can show and be assured that our design shares the same angle in many other locations too. But the last tip before we look at an actual logo design grid is about micro white space. So here's another mock design, but let's slap that onto a grid. Now I can be really precise with the distance between the logo symbol and the logo type. I could also go in and kern the lettering to fit the grid, but in this instance my grid is just a bit too wide. Grids really help in being precise with micro white space around the logo symbol, the logo type, and between each other. But hey, what do you say? Let's look at the fixed grid in Illustrator and how to actually properly use it. So in Adobe Illustrator, we want to come up to View and then Show Grid. But importantly, also check the Snap to Grid option. This is going to prove to be essential when you're designing your logos. And you can see that here because anything I create will fix itself to the grid lines. This helps to make sure everything you make is neat and flush on your vector logos. So I'm going to start off with a circle using the ellipse tool, and I'm going to hold down both the Alt Option key and Shift. Again, for an actual logo project, you should know what the design is going to look like before you bring it to the grid. And you want to go through the design process and all that good stuff. Now I'm going to copy this and then paste it in place with Command or Control F. Notice how nicely my circles are touching the grid and snapping to it. Now I'm going to use the pen tool next, and you don't even need to hold down Shift when you're drawing things out, simply because the Snap to Grid option is activated. It makes drawing so much easier, guys. Now can you envision what sort of quick mock logo I'm going to make from this here? But next, I'm going to use that technique by using a circle to measure a width of my design. But I want this circle to be a standalone circle at the same width as my other part of the logo. So after finishing up with one more line, it's time to grab the Shape Builder tool, which you can find right here. With your design highlighted, just click around it like so, and if you want to remove things, just use the Alt Option key. And hey, that's a very quick mock logo symbol just made using a grid. And like I said, to keep unity on a logo design, or even a typeface for that matter, you can take parts of your design, copy it over, and you will keep the angles the same degrees as we looked at earlier. So here are some reasons for using a grid on your logos and how to go about it when you embark on a design. And if you really want to get to grips with the logo design process, be sure to check out my e-guide linked in the description box below. The first sign that your logo designs are perhaps not up to scratch often results in the logo design looking gimmicky, unprofessional, and even outdated. Now, this often happens when a logo designer is eager to impress and decides to throw a bunch of effects and software filters onto their logo design. This ultimately leads to an over-reliance on software effects and software functions. So we're talking about the use of excess gradients, crazy or complex typography, drop shadows, bevels, and just unnecessary effects that really have no place. Now, if you take a good logo, it allows its form, its shape psychology, and composition to do all the talking, not bells and whistles that look like, well, pretty much 90s clip art. A mature and really professional logo designer can actually move past these gimmicky effects, and they can make logos that are truly iconic and stand the test of time. Now, the next sign that your logo design doesn't necessarily cut the mustard is something I was personally guilty of for quite a long time. Now, it comes from a lack of attention to detail, little to no technical proficiency, and simply a designer who is rushing. This sign is sloppy or poor execution, where the designer may have a great idea or concept, but doesn't pay enough attention to the quality of the finished design. Now, here are some hallmarks that are very classic and very normal for a logo that is guilty of this. Pixelation or blurriness, which is often a result of a raster design and not a vector. Another cause of poor quality output is uneven spacing and poor alignment, and this stands out like a sore thumb and automatically looks like amateur hour. Inconsistent line thickness, unless of course it's actually intentional on, say, a more organic or hand-drawn-esque design. And then also a weird or complex composition that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, always look at your logo and scrutinize it and think, is it up to scratch? Is it neat enough? You should never skimp on the final execution of your design. Now, here's something that is so important that if you're exhibiting this warning sign, you really need to flip and reverse it right away. Let's say a small business owner, let's call her Sophie, is launching a new bakery and is in need of a logo to represent her brand. Now, she decides to hire a freelance graphic designer, Alex. Alex promises her 4 things: a quick turnaround, a quality and successful logo due to his past projects, unlimited revisions, and a bespoke design. Instead of this, Sophie gets poor communication, missed deadlines, a somewhat unoriginal logo that looks like it's been pulled up from Canva, and 1 revision. Alex sounds like a terrible person. But anyway, this is an extreme example, of course, but the message here is of over-promising and under-delivering. What you should aim to do is to over-deliver on your promises and just wow or surprise your clients. If you promise 14 days turnaround, try and send it in 10. If you promise 3 design concepts, send 4 solid concept designs. And that is how you grow a career and connections with clients. There are likely a very small percentage of beginner logo designers who aren't guilty of this next sign, and it points to their logos and their workflows just not being quote-unquote good. If a logo designer is tasked to design something for a Save the World charity, they might simply jump onto their computer and just start designing. That's a no-no. This directly ignores something called strategic design thinking. Without strategic thinking, the designer might totally ignore target audience analysis, which would result in a logo that doesn't speak the language of the people the brand intends to reach. Now, this could also result in a logo that looks good now, but it doesn't stand the test of time and has a very short lifespan. The designer might also assume that any visually appealing design will work without aligning with the organization's missions and the goals or the brand identity. When designing a logo, you need to plan and to think in a methodical way. You need to do research and approach it from a problem-solving mindset. This is how good and functional designs are created over and over again. Now, as a bonus tip, I'm going to share 3 core aspects that you should explore when thinking about strategic logo design. Target audience. Who are they? What do they like? What do they dislike? And just what makes them tick? Shape, color, and typeface psychology. How can your logo express a message and a tone via these 3 things? Memorability. How are you going to ensure the logo sticks in the mind of the target audience like a permanent but welcomed hook? Now, the 5th warning sign that your logo isn't that good is most probably one of the worst on this list, if not the worst. But at the same rate, it's the easiest to fix, so let's have a look. If you are a logo designer who is exhibiting this warning sign, you can expect some of your logos to represent this. Unfinished and rushed designs that look unprofessional. A competitive disadvantage against other similar client brands. Doesn't match the brand or client identity. Missed opportunities for good concept creation and execution. Now, what can actually cause your logo or a logo to have these negative traits? Simply put, it's a lack of iteration and revision on the designer's part. It's so easy to make a design and to just settle on that first design. But this is such a killer to a logo design career, it's unreal. All it takes is to give things a bit more time and to evolve your first designs, while of course referring to the brief and the research. Now, 99% of the time, your second design or second iteration of a design will be better than the very first design you make. That is, if you approach the iteration with design thinking and a problem-solving mentality in the logo design project. The next sign that your logo design approach isn't as good as it could be refers to the latter stages of a project. Now, providing clients with logo files that are not properly formatted or optimized for various different applications is something you want to avoid, and examples here might be missing vector files, incorrect color modes, poorly named files, and so on. Now, this can lead to compatibility issues and hinder the logo's usability or usage at the other end for the client. To increase your chances of getting more work from the client you're working with, do not rush or mismanage the end stages of the project. We're talking about the packaging and the presentation. Don't underestimate this whatsoever. You can technically build a career and earn money from logo designs that show these negative signs in today's video, but it's a lot more difficult than if you just fix and address these signs. Now, my career and my logo designs really grew to greater things when I started to implement shape psychology into my projects, and that's why it's the first tip in today's video. Now, I'm not going to go into huge detail about the psychological meaning for each kind of shape, because I have done that multiple times on this channel, and there are loads of websites out there that talk about it. But briefly, squares and rectangles are strong and reliable, circular or oval shapes represent community, friendship and love, angled straight lines are linked back to motion and a dynamic sense of speed, and the list just goes on. But the important thing is to understand that our subconscious mind responds in different ways to different logo shapes. Straight lines, circles, curves, jagged edges, they all imply a different meaning, and so a skilled logo designer can use shapes to evoke a specific emotion to the target market, or to make the target market think a certain way. And remember, graphic design is just a visual communication, so shape psychology is a huge part of logo designing, or it should be. A very good example of shape psychology is the cat logo. Now, cat is short for caterpillar, and they're a business that leads the way in heavy construction machinery, production and sales. Triangles from a shape psychology point of view show strength and stability, which obviously is something you want to evoke when talking about machinery used in construction. Now, we would look into why yellow or orange is used for this logo, but that's another story for a different video. But if you do think you know, comment below. The second tip is to experiment with placing your logo design shapes in real life situations to see how they look. Sometimes we can kind of get tunnel vision when crafting our logo shapes on paper or design software, and that can lead us to where we forget about the actual practical use of the logo design. So before you send designs to a client or settle on a specific logo shape, try mocking it up on a business card, a letterhead, a banner, or wherever the logo might end up in real life, and see how it functions in that situation. You might find that your logo on screen looks very, very different when it's used in a real life application, and that might change the whole course of your project. Tip number 3 is to know your client and the target market. Yeah, I've said this many times, but you should be doing things like compiling a list of the corporate values of your client, or take a close look at the goals the business wants to achieve. If you conduct the research needed, you can then start to formulate concepts that turn into logo design shapes. So basically here, tip number 3 is a quick reminder to know your client and also their customers. The 4th tip helps with getting the ideas for your logo shapes. From your research, you can marry together word pairs in couples. So an example could be that Adidas had 2 words such as motion and progress, which would lead to their logo shape being born, as angled straight lines do evoke a sense of forward motion, and the steps up could be seen as progress. Or you can take my Truth Art logo project, where I used the initials for TNA for Truth Art, and then I also turned that into an easel, which of course relates back to art. Combining word pairs or words can lead to the best logo shapes, when carefully thought out of course. The 5th tip for excellent logo design shapes is to really focus on memorability. Now it's one of the core concepts of a great logo design, and if you do focus on the logo being memorable throughout a project, you will likely end up with something halfway to being acceptable. And often an easy way to make a logo design memorable is to keep it simple. Think of the most popular logo designs out there. We're talking about Nike, Apple, McDonald's, Microsoft. All of these logos have shapes that are very, very simple and they stick in your mind. And that's the main key to their success, really, of course, alongside branding techniques and such. Tip number 6 is to use a grid. There are many grids at your disposal as a logo designer. Using a grid will ensure that your shapes are precise and crafted with care. Sure, you can start off with a sketch or an idea, but when it comes to finishing that shape, using a grid is almost always going to be a great idea. Now you may have watched videos on the shape builder tool before. You know, the ones where you're told the Alt Option key removes areas and how to make interesting shapes with that tool. Well, today's video goes way beyond that, as I share some really useful and crucial tips for using the shape builder tool in logo designing. The first tip today seems a little bit weird, but it's vastly important, and I've seen designers getting this totally wrong before. When designing a logo, don't start with the shape builder tool. Don't even give it a few clicks. Now there is a good reason for this, and that is that a good quality logo design requires the logo design process. This means you should be researching the brand, developing an overall image of the project, and creating concepts. Once you have all of those bases covered, you can then begin to incorporate your digital designing and the use of a shape builder tool. So don't rush in with 300 circles on your artboard trying to make some interesting logo design shapes with the shape builder tool. So tip number 2 with the shape builder tool is that it's always a great idea to import some sketches for your logo design concepts right into Illustrator, and you can use them as guides when you're using the shape builder tool. Also, you could make some sketches using a drawing tablet directly into Illustrator and then lock these down as a guide for you creating the logo itself. Of course, it's whichever best suits you and your workflow. And to import sketches, either scan them or just simply take a picture on a camera or a smartphone and then upload that to Illustrator. Having your ideas and concepts right there on screen does vastly help the workflow, especially when using the shape builder tool. The third tip is a quick and a simple one, and that is to change the keyboard shortcut for the shape builder tool. Now by default it's probably Shift and M on your keyboard, and if you don't use a keyboard shortcut for this tool already, you probably should. And that's because you first need to select all of the shapes and then access the tool afterwards. And this can be annoying. But also the standard shortcut is annoying of Shift and M. And so trust me, just having a very simple and very easy shortcut will make your workflow that much more smoother in the long run. So the fourth tip for using this shape builder tool in logo designing is to check for gaps. Sometimes we might have gaps in our shape orientations, and this will mess up the workflow with the shape builder tool. So if you actually select or double click the tool in the toolbar, you will bring up a settings menu, and then you can just click the box to check for gaps and then set the size setting. Having this gap detection activated means Illustrator will actively search for any gaps and then just ignore them so you can use the tool as normal. It's just one of these things that can be very handy, and sometimes people do have gaps without realizing and don't understand why the shape builder tool is not working. Tip number 5 today is that you want to have your snapping settings correct, and this is so that we can align things and position things exactly where we want to have them. We don't want Illustrator to be stubborn and to snap objects to places we don't want them being. And so firstly, do not have the align to pixel grid option selected. And then also make sure your snapping options on smart guides and also just in general are well suited for this kind of workflow. So you probably want to have quite a low tolerance on these snapping options. And tip number 6 for using the shape builder tool is to make use of outline mode. Now this is Command or Control Y on your keyboard, and it's a highly effective function for making sure everything is precise and flush with your shape orientation. Sometimes we have a thick stroke or a filled shape or some other stuff going on, and if you just come into outline mode, everything is really precise and crystal clear to work with, and we can align things really perfectly. Of course, you don't want extra bits hanging off of your designs when making a logo. So what is the offset path function in Illustrator, and how can it be effectively used for logo designing? Now there are two key offset path functions in Illustrator, and today we're going to be looking at just one of them. But I'm going to show you how it works and then some tips or some tricks for applying that function to logo designing. To demonstrate the offset path function, I'm going to make a circle using the ellipse tool, which is L on your keyboard. And then I'm going to duplicate the circle by holding down the Alt Option key and then just clicking and dragging. Now we can create the illusion that these circles are overlapping simply by using the offset path function. And so first I'm going to outline the stroke of the circles to vector shapes. Then in the same drop-down menu, you will find the offset path function, which you can see right here. Do make sure to check the preview box so you can see your actions in real time. And as you can see, I'm adding an extra shape around the existing shape of my design. Now we can change the style of the offset path, but for this design, it doesn't really matter because it's totally round. We can look at this in later videos if you do want to see that. But also we can control the amount of offset here, and pressing up and down on the arrow keys on your keyboard will increase or decrease that amount. Now if you hold down Shift, it will increase this by increments of 10, and if you hold down the Command or the Control key, it's going to do so in decimals. Now after adding the offset path, you can change the color of it by clicking the color palette or using the eyedropper tool. So now the circles look like they're overlapping. However, this isn't the end of the story, because if we drag the design off to the side of the artboard, we can see the white outlines, which isn't ideal for a logo design. So what we can do is to select the design and then choose the shape builder tool. Now you will notice that when you hold down the Alt Option key, you have a minus icon above the cursor, and this is going to allow you to remove the white areas of your design. Now once this has been completed, you will have a design worthy of sending to a client, simply because those white outlines are no longer visible. So just a heads up, of course this logo design is not related to a brief and it's not incredibly well thought out. It's just a simple demonstration of the power of the offset path function in Illustrator. But as we did earlier, create a circle, but this time we only want to use a single circle. Increase the stroke weight and then press C for the scissors tool. You're going to want to click the bottom anchor point and then also the left hand side anchor point. And you will notice that you are left with a 3/4 of the circle highlighted, which you can then delete. Now press P for the pen tool and then click the bottom anchor point and hold down Shift to move the cursor upwards. Shift is going to ensure that you are following a completely straight path. Now the smart guides are telling me when I'm in line with the left anchor point, so I'm then going to move the pen tool over, still holding down Shift. So we now have this shape right here, but go ahead and press M for the rectangle tool and create a perfect square by holding down Shift. Now drag your design to a corner of the square and increase the design size so it meets the edges of the square, like so. Send it to the back of all design assets. But just to make sure that the design is perfectly within the square, you can press Command or Control Y to enter into outline mode. And as you can see, mine is a little bit off, so I'm going to adjust that really quickly. Pressing Command or Control Y again will bring you right back out of outline mode. So now it's time to use the offset path function one more time. And of course, the measurements you use are up to you and on your design that you're working on. But when you're happy with the amount of offset, we can actually change the offset path to white so we can visualize the design more efficiently. And then select everything, and as we did before, use the shape builder tool to remove the areas that you don't want to use. If you do make a mistake while editing this design, just press Command or Control Z. So you're going to be left with a neat design, and the beauty of the offset path is that the curvature of the design here perfectly reflects the curvature of the shape in the bottom left. However, things are not as clean as they could be, because if we go into the layers panel, you will notice something that's not quite right. There is a layer hidden here below the black design shapes. Taking the design off of the artboard, it becomes obvious to see. But this is not an issue, however, because we can just easily drag it into the trash like so. This important video is going to make your logo design process so much easier and way more efficient. For example, right here, I've got a logo design that I've made, but there's one crucial thing every logo designer should do. So head up to Window and then open up the Actions panel. Okay, cool. So now create a new action and call it something like Scale Test. And once you hit record, you're now recording every single action that we do in Illustrator. And I'm going to duplicate my logo with the Alt Option key and then use the Scale tool to bring down the scale to 75% of the original. You just hit enter when you have the Scale tool. And I'm going to keep doing this several more times, all while Illustrator is recording my process over in the Actions panel. We want to do this as a logo designer because even if our logo looks really neat and it does actually apply to the brief, it may not perform well at small scales or sometimes even at large scales. Okay, so once you're finished, just click Stop in the Actions panel. Now you have yourself a very quick way to scale test any logo design. You just highlight your design and then you click play here and boom, scaled designs really fast. And of course this does work on pretty much anything in Adobe Illustrator. So here's a handy artboard hack that very few designers know about. And this really helps for exporting designs and then sending them to the clients. So I'm going to drag my logo off to the artboard for a moment and make sure it's still highlighted. Then come and grab the artboard tool here. If you hold down Shift, you'll notice the cursor icon changes as you can see right here. And then if you click the logo, Illustrator will make a perfect artboard that touches the edges precisely on your design. And you can then select the original artboard and delete it by pressing backspace if you want to. And this will leave the new artboard as the dominant one on your project. Again, this does help if you want a precise artboard and want to export the design in this way. Perhaps for your client to say, "Ooh, great job." Or maybe something along the lines of, "Nah, please make it pop." This next logo process is great for those creative typographic logo design projects that you might actually have. Now here's some pretty neat logotype. And if you're wondering, this typeface is Pacifico. Okay, so with your logotype selected, come to the free transform tool, hold down a click and then navigate to the puppet warp tool. And we're going to use this tool in combination with another one for a perfect match in Illustrator. But with this puppet warp tool, you will have some anchors already set up on your typography, but we can click to add new nodes or anchors like so. Adding nodes would allow your logotype to remain locked in position in that area while you make edits in other areas. And this can be a lot of fun, and you can take somewhat generic and regimented typography and really add some character to it. However, in doing so, you might notice some unwanted effects as seen right here. For these, I like to press A for the direct selection tool and then grab the smooth tool. You might want to actually double click the tool in the toolbar and adjust the smooth settings. But yeah, when you use these two tools in combination in unison, you can create some original and interesting logotype. When designing a logo, people often gravitate to the pen tool for some reason. And sure, this is a valid method, but an easy and a clean way to design logos is to make use of preset shapes. As an example here, I'm working with a rectangle. But what logo do you think this is going to end up to be? But yeah, using shapes is not only quick, it allows the designer to ensure the logo is clean and precise. And there is sort of a golden rule or good tip to remember, which we will briefly talk about now. And yeah, of course, this is the Mitsubishi logo. So as a general rule, brands that are based around man-made products or a logo that wants to appear man-made needs to use straight-edged geometric shapes and lines as a good choice. For designs that want to appear natural and organic or depict living beings, curvy and smooth lines or shapes are a better option. This is an absolutely essential part of my logo design process, and so I must mention in today's video. Using the Illustrator mirror option saves so much time it's actually ridiculous. It allows me to make sure my symmetrical designs are 100% precise and ultra clean. I originally designed this logo before Adobe added the mirror function to Illustrator, but now it's there, I always use it. Another part of my process that is so essential but which I have spoken about before is the multiple screens process. In Illustrator, just open up your document in 2 more windows and then arrange it however you want. Yeah, I know, I've mentioned this before, but I want to show my current process for designing logos in 2023 in Illustrator, and this is a crucial part of the process for me. Now, I'm sure that many of you know about global colors, but we can use them in interesting and valuable ways when designing a logo. So I have my logo design here, and with it selected, I can create a new color group. Now give this group a name relevant to your logo or your branding project that you are currently working on, and also have both of these lower boxes checked. So as you can see in the swatches panel, we now have a new group with the color swatch. You can quickly pull up some information on your swatch right here, and also you can adjust things in relation to the different color modes. However guys, the first really cool thing about this feature is that we can create various different tints of the same logo due to the fact we have a global swatch. So in the color panel, you will notice the T icon stating we are changing the tints. And that means that we can just increase or decrease the lightness of our original color. And this is awesome for monochrome designs, but also just nice to grab a variation of the starting logo color. I can easily add my new option to the color group like so, and this is useful because we can share it, or we can come back to it later at any stage. And for those of you who work on logo designing or branding projects, you are for sure going to want to stay tuned to the very end of today's video, as the last tip is a real doozy. But first, let's take a look at adding color themes to the library. I have here the main swatch for my logo, and also then a swatch for my logo type. Now if I click the Add to Library button, I've then applied that color theme into the Creative Cloud library. And that's with my branding project name. So the handy and the obvious upshot of this is that I can share it to fellow designers or even clients and export it to my computer. So let's look at some quick modifications that we can make within the swatches panel to our branding color group. Now you will notice the color wheel here, and clicking this icon brings us into the edit color mode for this specific color group. We can edit the hue, saturation and brightness, which is quite useful. But also we do have 2 swatches in this color group if you remember. The dark circle in the middle is my logotype swatch, and so I can edit that as well independently of the other one. So let's say I want this color change here. I can then go ahead and save it, but the neat thing is that Illustrator is going to create an entirely new group in the swatches panel. I can then go ahead and apply these changes to a newer version of my logo design and just test it out on screen to see how it looks. So yeah, the next part of today's video is truly powerful. I have here some new logo type to my original logo mark, but let's go ahead and open up the libraries panel once again. In the top right fly down menu, create a new library and then give it a title relevant to your project that you're working on. I can then drag and drop the logo symbol itself into here, as well as the text too. I can also come and make sure I have the relevant swatch selected in the color palette, and then I can actually add that swatch into the library as well, essentially building up a kind of brand catalog for the materials used on my project. But wait, there's even more. I can even add the character style used for the logotype. So you will be able to share this to your clients, fellow designers, and because it's interwoven into the Creative Cloud, it can be opened on any device you log into. So I hope you can see how this will be beneficial to your workflow as a logo designer or just in general in Adobe Illustrator. Of all the logo designs that I've ever made in the past, this one is the design I'm most proud of. So, how do I get from point A to point B with a real-life logo design project? The most important part in any logo design project is arguably the first few phases. And in case you're wondering, aileron for the typography is a strong presence in today's video. I know you guys love to know which fonts I'm using. So discussing the project with the client early on is really essential. You need to know everything about the client, their business, their goals and their pain points, and also their target audience. So let's get to know the client for this project and let's travel along that journey of the logo design process. The client for this specific logo design project reached out to me and described the situation in full. They were a new brand planning to launch in the jiu-jitsu world and had no logo or even a brand name. And that was their main fundamental problem I had to solve. This initial message is only one section, of course, but the first main action I did was to pull up some keywords of interest that would really help me later down the line. And you might be asking how a keyword is going to help you. How far can that actually go? Well, they simply help to better understand the project and the direction of the brand and the logo. So obviously, jiu-jitsu is going to be one keyword, and then I had things like teaching, people, team, strong, and community. These words all describe the business and the overall feeling of the brand. But trying to think of the project in this way early on really will help you later down the line in your logo design projects. So in case you guys didn't actually know, here's a brief description of what jiu-jitsu is. It's the martial art my logo and brand needed to relate to. And of course, also the jiu-jitsu community had to jive with my logo design and brand name. One of the first methods I used for research here was to actually make mood boards, and I often find them pretty useful. They can help to build a picture or a vibe of the business and the client, as well as the project direction. This was just one part of my mood board, and as you can see, typography is mainly a bold sans serif font in other existing designs. And also there's quite a strong sense of geometry in a lot of these designs. Now, as I conducted more and more research, it became obvious to me that a serif font would not work for this brand. Serifs are way too formal and traditional, and they wouldn't fit the narrative for a martial arts studio or any kind of sporting logo. One huge part of my logo design process, and something I mentioned in the logo design process e-guide, is the use of keywords. I actually asked the client in the initial stages to send over some keywords that relate to their brand and the message of the company. And these are some of the important ones that I pulled out from that list. I added to the list myself as well, but these keywords did help me build up concepts later in the logo design process. And you yourself should aim to get these keywords from your clients as early on as possible. But one crucial thing to keep in mind is that these keywords, they should resonate with the target audience of your client's brand. So as an example, in this specific project, that would be people who potentially would sign up to jiu-jitsu school or class, and these people would likely want to have a sense of community, togetherness, and a desire to become stronger and skilled in martial arts. A strong and robust expression is something that a martial arts school might want to give out in their brand image and logo. So always think about the keywords and then how they relate back to the target audience when you're designing a logo. Now, I didn't know much or anything about jiu-jitsu before this project, so I made sure that I studied, I researched, and I knew pretty much everything there is to know about it. I even got to know the terminologies and the lingo in this actual industry sector. I feel like the better you understand your client's industry sector or niche, the far more superior your logo design will actually end up being. The keywords and body of research then lead onto the actual designing. So here I generated other keywords around my initial ones. So for example, I have some words for the keywords strong that I felt would actually relate back to the brand and the concept. I'd suggest trying this out for each of your original keywords. You won't regret it. These keywords have a true power and place in the logo design process, and you'll see how they can actually help generate several really good concepts. And to do that, you're going to need to bring the keywords together into pairs. And of course, in this project, it actually helped me make that brand name. So here are some of the word pairs that I generated. And as you can see, each pair relates back to the brand and they utilize those words, those very keywords from the previous phase. And here's a useful trick when making these word pairs. Try to think about things in a visual way and how you might actually demonstrate those words or those pairs in a concept, visually speaking. So for example, grip might be a fist in some way. And this is where the creative side of things start to come into play in the process. But yeah, I wanted to add Jiu-Jitsu at the very end of the brand name to incorporate that into the logo itself. So once I decided on the crucial brand name, thanks to the keywords and the word pairs, which was iron grip, I again generated words around that pair to come up with my logo concepts. I tried to think about things visually again and what words might communicate the message effectively. One initial idea that came to mind was a fist due to the word grip, and grip is a huge part of Jiu-Jitsu. I know a fist is quite cliche, but this was just an initial starting point, to be honest. The fist was also way too detailed, so I started to make up simple shapes that could maybe resemble a fist in some way, as you can see here. I also considered shape psychology and how that relates back to martial arts and sports. Stability and strength are communicated by straight edge shapes and straight lines. I thought this was a really good choice to pursue, and I learned this from my research earlier. And like I said, a serif font was never on the cards for this logo design, but I finally went for a bold sans serif typeface for this logo, and this would fit in line with the brand a lot better than a serif. Another concept that I wanted to explore was that of using G in grip. I simplified things from a G into somewhat side view of a fist, but added a hook section here that will actually give a metallic kind of feel, which again just relates back to the iron part of that brand name. It's often things like this, these small details that do leverage your logo and give you some good talking points and some kind of legs to stand on in the pitch to the client. Now I went on and applied more shape psychology and made sure to include straight edges so the logo does conform to a strong, robust nature. However, some of the important keywords were team and togetherness, if you remember. And so to incorporate that, I referred back to my shape psychology and added a circular shape which is conforming to that. I was now headed in the final direction for the logo, and I felt that there was just too much negative space right here. If the logo was set on top of typography, it would just look a bit odd having this much space right here. So I came up with several design solutions to resolve that issue, and these are the 3 logo design solutions. I really like this design, and I thought this was a strong, iconic, and it just simply worked. However, here's the plot twist. The client wanted design finally as seen here, the triangle edition, and I personally don't prefer this design, but hey, client always wins, right? And which design do you prefer, and do you like this design process? Let me know in the comment down below, and of course, until next time guys, design your future today. Peace.